Ladies and gentlemen, we're having a crack already. It's myself and Staz Staziker, CGC, the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross, which is, after the Victoria Cross, the next award for gallantry. And one hell of a guy. He runs ThruDark with his buddy, and he's just come back from summiting Everest in a record time with Al Kars, who we've had on, Kev Godlington, and Garth. And we've already had great banter. So Staz, welcome. Great having you on the podcast.
Jonathan, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure to be on here, and I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we're going to have a good banter. And I particularly enjoyed your book, which I do recommend everybody listening around the world. It's called The Hard Road Will Take You Home, read by Staz, and he's got some amazing people. He has his little bits on the audio book where he includes the podcast conversation with people like Aldo Kane and Nims Purja and a whole range of other really inspiring leaders who have a lovely banter about them, a bit of humility, but have got very interesting backgrounds. What was it like putting a book together? I mean, as you know, you're in my next book, the CEO's Compass, how to navigate teams through turbulent times. And if anybody's led anybody through turbulent times, you have. How was it writing your book?
Yeah, thank you. I guess much like the title, Jonathan, The Hard Road Will Take You Home, it was difficult. It was during COVID. So in some respect, it wasn't on the whiteboard either when it came down to the planning and preparation and the meticulous things that surround business in its totality. That sort of sideswiped everybody, not just ThruDark and ourselves personally and professionally. But I took that time to sort of dive into the book, The Hard Road Will Take You Home. And now I'm in esteemed company here, with Ant Middleton, Foxy, Billy Billingham, some great names there that have already carved the path here for people of my ilk and my previous sort of generation. So for me, I wanted to do something slightly different. I didn't want it to make it such an autobiography around myself, but I wanted to talk about my lessons learned, the hard lessons learned through my time, not just in the special forces within the SBS, but joining the military and the hardships and the lessons learned through that. And then moving on then from special forces into business. And the things that I'd learned along the way and how you can apply them as an individual, personally and professionally. So there's a kind of a story, there's a military story, a personal life story, and then a business story, and then an anecdote at the end or an action on in terms of how I think or how I've applied that, and then how I think hopefully, you as the listener or the reader can apply that to yourself.
And you know what? I think this is what makes you for me, you're going to be episode 396, I think, out of almost 400 guests, you're almost like the perfect one because you've done some military background, you've learned some lessons, you've had a tough upbringing, but it's not defined you, it's shaped you. You've moved away from that towards something, but then you've gone into business. You've had the highs and lows, success, failure, almost going bust, going really well. And now ThruDark is a very successful business. So it's that lovely mixture of business and lessons from the military, which you have applied to people and reflected on it in your stories, yours and the podcast conversations you've had with your buddies. And it's stuff that we can take away. I took a lot from it. So, for example, I was thinking about hard work. You talked about hard work. You were always humble enough to say, didn't just fall in my plate. And I'm also listening to a completely different book. Being a dyslexic, I listen to about 2 audiobooks a week. So in the last 5 years since I've been doing this, that's a lot of books. And yours is up there as some of the best ones to listen to. The Hard Road Will Take You Home. And what I connected was with growth mindset from Dr. Carol Dweck, where she said it's really a mistake to say to kids, and you got kids, you're really talented. Because you say to them you're talented, they think, I don't need to work at this. I'm just bloody good at this. It doesn't take hard work. And therefore I won't have a go at something in case I don't look so cool. Because if I fail, then that breaks my concept that I am naturally gifted and I don't have to show up on the range. I don't have to do anything. I'll just appear at ThruDark and money will flow in. And you made that really clear about let go of the ego, have this beginner's mindset. You talked about white belt mentality. Do you want to say a bit about that lesson, Staz?
Yeah, thanks, John. There's quite a bit to unpick there, and I love this sort of conversation as well. So I'll dive in, but pull me back, or when I sort of go off piste here. There's a few points that I really want to sort of lean into there that you've raised. The first around kind of hard work. Look, I'm first and foremost, I'm a father, right, to three boys. I'm a husband and I'm a father, and that goes beyond and above everything that I've done thus far. It's my sort of greatest achievement. And my eldest Lucas is 13, and I've got Albie who's 8, and Huey who's 4. And Lucas in particular is going through that sort of stage at the moment with everything that's happening in the news and the media around adolescents and young boys. And I'm doing some fantastic work at the moment, which we can touch on later on, around young boys initiatives and white working class boys, and the sort of disparity there and the socioeconomic disparity with those groups and young boys, young men in particular, and how that shapes the future and our future leaders as well, which I think is vitally important. And doing some work with Dr. Alex Blower from the University of Bournemouth. I digress. However, I now want to talk around young boys. I actually use this analogy or framing for my eldest boy Lucas, who was having quite a turbulent time. He went into secondary school, and it was just square peg round hole. Look, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it, Jonathan? And kind of reminded, I see myself in him, and he reminds me of myself because he's a lovely boy. Speaks very well mannered, communicates well, very respectful. However, if there's a crossing in terms of a respect, or if he's being spoken to, and at, and not being engaged correctly, then you lose him, and then that can come across as, quote unquote, bad behavior. Now, for me, that needs empathy. It needs a deeper, wider conversation around, the archaic school system. But I actually said to him, for me personally, growing up, when I had a promising football career, I was playing for England schoolboys, associated with professional clubs, and my granddad, who sadly passed away last year, who raised me with my nan when my mum passed away when I was 11, fantastic people, but they were from that older generation. And my granddad used to sort of watch me on the football field. And look, John, I wasn't the most talented, and I never have been the most talented. We could argue that potentially I've got high EQ through the things that I've done and the circles I've been afforded to roll in. However, he sort of said to me one day, I sort of come off the football field, and I was never the most talented. And he used to say to me, look, it doesn't matter about talent, because if you outwork everybody on that field, you run harder and faster, and you give 110%. One, that's unmatched. You can't teach that. And two, when you leave the field, you've left it all on there, and you can feel good about yourself, and the talent, the skills will come. They will develop with time. And at that moment in time, it resonated with me, but probably not as deeply as it does right now, with with the ability now to connect the dots and look back, and just how pivotal that was. So that's something I'm trying to implement with my boys at the minute, and not necessarily being the best at everything that they do, but putting 110% effort in, because I wasn't academic either at school. My brain just was engaged differently. I'm not diagnosed ADHD, but I certainly tick a lot of those boxes. So yeah, and the white belt mentality, which you touched on as well, I think for me it's always been something that's very important to me, to have a growth mindset that is also attached to putting myself in difficult situations, being a learner, being a new person at something, because I've always had a thirst and an appetite for learning and to trying to be the best version of myself. And look, it's easy for me, given all the things that you mentioned at the beginning. I could dine out on my success and who I think I am, or who I thought I used to be, and what I attached so much of my identity to what I used to do within special forces. And actually you have to sort of almost reinvent yourself when you leave those circles and that echo chamber. And yeah, importantly for me, it was about, well, I want to learn a new skill. I want to put myself into these situations that are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I want to be not the best at something that I am doing. And with that then comes a beautiful level of humility, which I think is very, very important and valid, not just in the jiu-jitsu world, but in life. And it transfers beautifully into business and into you as an individual.
Yeah, and in your book, you covered it beautifully, particularly in the field of jiu-jitsu, which, as I mentioned to you, my wife and my stepdaughter have done. Though my stepdaughter did get her foot, I think her foot broken when someone landed badly on her. But they both loved it. in that, I love that expression. Get someone else to fold your clothes for you while you're still wearing them. I
Yeah,
just roar with laughter
yeah.
when someone's got their foot on your chest or whatever it is. What is it you've learned from jiu-jitsu that keeps your humility? I think is the point I was going to say.
God, so much, and I'm sort of smiling because, yeah, sometimes the hammer, sometimes the nail, and as you're going through the ranks, for the majority of time, my time, in particular, spent on the mats with Nathan, my instructor, predominantly one-to-one sessions with a black belt. I'm more oftentimes than not the nail, and I'm fine with that. And yeah, so much to learn there in terms of discipline,
Mm-hmm.
hard work, commitment, learning a new skill, and then applying the skill as well. But it is very much like how would I describe it? It's like drowning above water. And it allows you to place yourself into a very, very compromising situation. A lot of the techniques are designed to incapacitate people, whether that is to choke you unconscious or whether that is to pull your limbs from your body. And it sounds horrible, but actually there's some beauty in that. And there's some trust as well, because you have to trust the people that you're rolling with, right? When you're sparring and doing the techniques, you have to trust that they're not going to do those things. But also, it allows you to get to a level where you have to tap. You have to say to yourself, okay, my ego can't be bigger than what's actually happening to me. So if I don't tap, the result will be I'll either go unconscious or I will break something. So and very quickly, we all have this bravado as men, don't we? And that's fine. I don't need to do martial arts, or I don't need to look after myself and understand my body and what I'm physically capable of. And with that comes a lot of ego. So untrained people think, well, it's fine. I just see red. When there's a fight, I'll just see red, and that's it. And it's like, well, no, that doesn't last very long, or doesn't go very far when you are fighting a trained individual and somebody that sort of dedicates their life to this profession. Now, that's not me. I'm not dedicated full time to this. For me, I'm a hobbyist at best. I've done a couple of competitions, but for the most part, it's about the other things that it's attached to. And hopefully, to round off your point there, what does it do for me? It humbles me. It keeps me very fit and active. It engages my brain, Jonathan. I don't meditate. I've tried the sort of guided meditation, and maybe I should give it a little bit longer, but back to the ADHD point, I think for me, it's just like a form of meditation. You are 110% focused in the here and now, on the doing, and you don't have time to think about all of life's stresses and worries. So for that hour that we're training, it's quite beautiful, because it's a sort of a coming together of techniques and skills and physical output. Humbles you, and I think it's fantastic. Look, my eldest was doing it, Lucas, but he's now transferred more towards boxing because he prefers the striking and football. But Albie, the 8-year-old, he's been going. He initially started off 3 times a week, but now he's on once a week. That seems to be better for him. And for me, as a father, there's not many things that I would insist my boys to do, but I think a form of martial arts, not necessarily jiu-jitsu, I think is absolutely paramount and key to them as individuals in terms of, one, their self-confidence, their ability to understand their own body and their mind, to put themselves in a difficult situation. Look, sometimes there's tears, sometimes there's scratches and scrapes and bruised arms and bruised egos. But I think there's some beauty in that. And I think we're sort of moving further and further away from that. So this is one of the things that I sort of will insist, or try to insist and imply that my young boys do, because once you have an understanding that you can look after yourself, with that comes a confidence in which then you don't have to prove it. And I think a lot of this masculinity issue around young boys, it's almost a hidden lack of confidence, and that manifests in outward behavior that is not conducive to good relationships within a normal working or social environment like school. And it's sort of masked by this bravado. They're all like little chimps, aren't they, running around banging their chests, and actually a huge proportion or majority of people don't do any form of martial arts. And I think there's a statistic around jiu-jitsu and the belt system. You start as a white belt. The next belt after that is a blue belt. Then it's a purple belt, brown, and then black. So there's only 5 belts there. But it is one of the hardest martial arts to step up the ranks. There's a sort of a saying that, you might have the belt, it's only the sort of 2 inches of cloth or coloured cloth, goes around your waist, but it's up to you then to look after yourself. And And it's quite there's an understanding where it transfers very well in most parts across any gym. I could go to, France or Germany on holiday, put my gi on my belt, and it's a sign or a symbol of the hours and hours and pain and blood and sweat and tears that I've put into the training to allow me to be in that position as what I am now as a purple belt.
And you've covered so many things that I really resonate with. And I loved your quote in your book from Field Marshal Alexander. People don't decide their future, they decide their habits. Then their habits decide their future. And you also mentioned a fan of one of my favorite authors, James Clear, his book on habits, atomic habits. And you're really touching on things like this about these habits that we set up, and how important it is to have a discipline, and also to teach our children not necessarily what dad says, but they watch what dad does. And they're going, dad says that, and he does it too. So I think back to years ago when I was in a firm called Penna. I was managing director of board executive coaching, and I got many things wrong. But one of the things that stuck with me, which reassured me on this policy, was that the way I was with certain people, you talk about EQ. I began in life not very good EQ, but I've learned it like a language over the years. And one of the guys said to me, the way you're behaving, we're learning from you, and it's making us think about how we behave, not what you say, but just how you're showing up, the way you treat customers and people like that. I thought, thank you. That's really nice, because I think I've probably given some bad examples to people in my early part of my life. What do you think about this about Field Marshal Alexander and their habits and their future?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic point to raise. I can give you a couple of examples. One, what we've just been talking around martial arts and training, and I'm a big proponent of this. And one of my things around leadership, and one of the most important things for me, is to inspire, daily, coming through work so that's professionally, inspire the people around me. And I do that through action, whether that's running a marathon for the brand, or training, or running events or pop-ups and Fizz Club events, but also that has a downstream effect. I've had people within work here that have then gone on to run, marathons, ultra marathons, or even a 5K, because they've said, wow, Staz, it's not just what you're saying, you're actually living and doing the do. You're not just standing by the kit, you're standing in it. And for me personally, as a father, again, my boy's seeing that. It wasn't for a while that I would take, Albie when he was young, really young. On a Saturday, I'd go and train at our Unit 4, which is a store, but also a gym. And I'd sort of take him away from Ruby, my wife, for a little bit, give her a little bit of breathing space, and say, look, I'm going to the gym, I'll take Albie with me. And it starts with his iPad and some snacks, and he sees me working out. And by the sort of fourth, fifth, sixth time of him coming, he's very slowly moving away, iPad shutting, Daddy, what are you doing? And I'm sort of talking him through it. And can I do it? And that's beautiful. At no point did I say, come here, jump off that, you need to do this. And the importance of physics, I didn't have to say anything. I just had to show him. And then that started with jiu-jitsu. I started bringing him into jiu-jitsu. Look, sit there, just chill out, relax. I'm going to train. And I'd then start training, and eventually they start looking, they're inquisitive, and they start saying, what are you doing? Why are you laughing? And sort of, oh, that looks funny. You're sort of cuddling men. But then they very quickly want to join in. Can I do it? I want to do this. And that's the best way, I think. And then another example more recently was Everest, and we can touch on this and go into more detail around the why.
No, it's just a good time. It's a good time.
Tell us everything else. But, I've always kept myself very physically fit, so that I am ready at any stage to jump at opportunities. And, and this opportunity came around through, I'm in an esteemed company, you've already mentioned their names, the likes of, Al Carnes and Kev Godlington, two people who I admire and look up to immensely. And I think the training around Everest, for me personally, I just had to sort of tweak and change it and dial it up. So it wasn't a huge shift and change for me personally, but it had to dial up around 10 to 12 hours a week. And a lot of this was spent in the gym, strength and conditioning training, out on the hills running, but some of the stuff that the kids didn't see, but some of it they did. So I had a static bike in my garage. It's not very glamorous in there, and I'm staring at a brick wall. Sometimes I have the iPad on there, I'll be watching it, because some of these sessions would go on for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and it's just zone 2 work, sort of slow, low heart rate.
Yeah, just tell us what I'm fascinated by zone 2. Are you a great believer in it? And
I'm sort of
to tell people what zone 2 training is.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I'm not a personal trainer or anything like that, so feel slightly not at ease, sort of going into too much detail. But from what I know and understand,
Mm.
and the things that I have been told, look, I had a coach. I had a Mark Rhodes from the Uncharted Performance, dial in all of my sort of physical training and preparation, but heart rate zone training is very important. And you might laugh as well, or resonate with this, Jonathan. Back in the day when we were in the military, it was doing phys or physical activity, be that a run or in the gym. For the most part, you just work out till your eyes bleed or the wheels fall off, and that was a sign of how hard you were working. Was, how bad you felt at the end. And actually, that's not the correct way to train. That
No.
isn't the smart way to train. There's a lot of science now that backs up a lot of these things that we're about to talk about. So there are different zones when you train. So zone one, and it's all individual to you. So what you have to do and should do is go and get tested. So you have a
Yeah.
benchmark that's scientifically proven from a VO2 perspective, so VO2 max and lactate threshold testing. And I did this at the Altitude Centre in London with the team. That then gives your trainers a greater understanding of where you're currently at in terms of your physical fitness and your respiratory fitness, and what zones then you can train in or should be training in. So zone one is super low intensity. Think walk. I'm going for a walk or a brisk walk. My heart rate should not go above, for me, 110 beats a minute.
Yeah.
So very, very steady work. Zone two, where the majority of your workout should be done, for me personally, starts around 120 to 140, 145 beats a minute. And it's the blue zone, if anybody uses smartwatches and all this sort of stuff. And that's the golden sort of space to work in. Yeah, yeah. So, and the problem is most people, their slow, easy work isn't easy enough, and their hard work isn't hard enough. So people sort of tend to hang around in this zone three space in no man's land. So they're sort of not working hard enough to increase VO2 and fitness, and they're not going slow enough or steady enough to build aerobic capacity. So that's it in its simplest form. So some or the majority of the work was done in zone two. It's quite light and easy. Feels like I should be going harder, but it's not. And I'm just solely focused on my heart rate, on the bike, pumping away. But back to the original point, my kids were in the garage. They'd be playing on the garden. They'd run in, look at me. And some of the sessions, because we were pre-acclimatizing at home, most of my stuff pre-acclimatizing was done in a hermetically sealed tent in the spare bedroom. So a little tube running in what looks like an ordinary tent over the spare bed. That was a hard sell to the missus to get that over the The tube then runs out into an oxygen machine, basically looks like R2D2, and this thing just reduces the amount of oxygen in the tent, which then it simulates altitude, less the pressure, obviously. But some of the sessions, like the bike in the garage, I would take this R2D2 machine down, attach it to a mask, and then I would work out in zone two with
Wow.
reduced oxygen.
Wow.
And yeah, that was pretty stinking. But the kids would come in and they'd see that. And they'd be thinking, oh, okay, so Dad's not telling me, he's showing me what's involved and what he has to do physically in order to climb Everest. Now, they don't understand what Everest is. It's a big hill. And Huey, bless him, my 4-year-old, any sort of semblance of a big hill, he's like, Daddy, is that like Everest? I'm like, well, you were kind of, yes, Huey, but a little bit bigger. Whereas the older boys kind of understand it and get it a little bit more.
Yeah, no, and look, well done with Everest. Do you want to just tell us what the aim was behind it? That you were raising funds also for a number of charities. I'd like you to talk
Yeah.
about the charities, and you broke a record. The four of you. I seem to remember, if I get this right, but you can correct me. You left the UK. You got to Nepal, where I'm going to Nepal on the 8th of October. I'm going for 2.5 weeks with my wife, and we're doing some work with charities out there for the victims of violence against women and girls and the sex trafficking, and also doing a little pre-launch of my book. And I'm with my friend General Himalaya Tapper, and we're going to be up around Annapurna, just some basic, nothing stressful. Well, relatively so. Tell us about it. And you did it in under 7 days, I think 6.5 days, which is a world record, from the UK to Nepal, climbed Everest, came down again, got back again. So tell us more. Over to you.
Yeah, I guess. Look, let's start with the most important. Why on earth would we do that? And I think there's a few reasons. When this initially came around, it wasn't my grand idea. And to sort of zoom out and give a little bit more context, Everest, look, it's the tallest mountain in the world, right? I love mountaineering. I love the outdoors. ThruDark is a technical outdoor clothing brand. For me personally, I couldn't justify personally or professionally leaving for 8 weeks. So a traditional Everest expedition would take you around 8 to 10 weeks. And traditionally, you would head out to Nepal with your guiding company and you would slowly acclimatize by sort of flying into Kathmandu airport. You'd go up to sort of Lukla and then you'd trek up the sort of up to Everest base camp. That could take anywhere between 12 to 15 days. And then you would stay in base camp for a couple of weeks, and then you would start your rotations up and down the mountain. And what's happening there is, the body is adapting, and everybody's different, right? Everybody's sort of uniquely adapted or not adapted to operate at altitude. And as human beings, we're not designed or supposed to be, operating or moving around at altitude. So we have to allow the body the time to naturally produce the red blood cells, which in turn move more oxygenated blood around the body. It's inherently dangerous, sort of climbing high altitude mountains. So the preparation and everything else that goes into this is key. But back to the why. I think, like all good plans are formulated, Jonathan, in the pub over too many beers. Kev was talking to Al, Garth, who was sort of on the expedition with us, had the current fastest known time. So he'd done it in 3 weeks and sort of suggested that he believed it could be done quicker with everything lining up correctly. Look, and we needed a lot of lady luck on our side. I think Al said before in an interview, his estimate was around a 30% chance of success. But, he was just being realistic, giving it all the things that were out of our control, and that, being logistics and weather and. So for me personally, what could I control? I could control myself, my physical ability, turning up pre-acclimatized through the pre-acclimatization process and making sure that I wasn't injured and I was, on top form. The why then came around veterans. Look, we're all former veterans ourselves, something that we are very, very passionate about. And we wanted to raise the profile of veterans. There's this unfortunate thing at the moment around sort of veterans being mad, bad and sad, and we wanted to really highlight the good in veterans, and the good that they can bring to wider communities and social settings and the workplace. So we really wanted to champion veterans and all the good that veterans can and do. We also then wanted to raise the awareness through doing a very unique and challenging mission. So we had to make it different. We couldn't just do a typical or quote unquote normal Everest expedition. And sort of given the things that we knew around pre-acclimatization and the times, we put the flag in the sand and said, look, I think we can do this under 7 days. So it really captured the imagination of the community, of the climbing community, and also wider as well, because most people can understand Everest. Even if you're not a mountaineer, you can say Everest, big hill, wow, that's a challenge, right? And then it was all about raising vital funds as well, and in particular Scottish Little Soldiers who deal with bereaved military kids. Again, something very, very close to our hearts. And then for me personally, I had some personal selfish sort of reasons for wanting to climb. One was attached to ThruDark, clearly being, as I've mentioned, a performance outdoor clothing brand. I really wanted, again, to not just stand by the kit, but stand in it, test and validate the kit and equipment, on the tallest mountain in the world. And what better place to sort of really shine a light on that. And then personally, I wanted to inspire my kids through the very things that we've just been speaking about, Jonathan, around action and doing. I want them, maybe if they don't understand it right now, and I think my eldest does, Lucas, and Albie to some extent, but hopefully in years to come they can say, wow. And again, it's not necessarily to say to them, look, you have to climb Everest or you have to join special forces, but you can achieve. Once you put your mind to something and you're surrounded by the right people, to facilitate your hopes and dreams, then actually you can go far. So in a nutshell, that's the kind of why. We've sort of touched on the who was involved, and then it happened. Thankfully, all sort of went to plan for the most part, and we managed to go from London. So wheels up, the clock started ticking. We flew into Kathmandu to Everest Base Camp, all the kit and equipment on. We didn't even spend a night in Everest Base Camp. We stepped off at 10 p.m. that evening after the Persia ceremony. and we went straight through the sort of camps. We were hit by an avalanche, just below Camp 1, which was interesting. Dusted ourselves off, and
I
then we
saw
moved
I
all the
saw
way
the
through.
video of you guys with this avalanche coming down towards you, and there's this sort of deathly silence, and then someone starts hysterically laughing. Typical ex-veterans, just found it funny, but yet
Yeah.
you almost could have all died.
Yeah, yeah. It was a kind of a surreal, strange moment. But I think, I've had a lot of people asking me, "Oh, you're not scared? Did you not panic?" And the answer was not because I'm, overly brave, or probably more stupid than brave, but actually we've been faced with adversity and difficult situations all our lives, especially given our background. And it was more of a calm sort of assuredness of, well, this is the process that we have to go through. It was kind of down on one knee, make sure we're attached to the fixed rope, shield ourselves from the avalanche coming in. And then there's a moment of sort of almost calmness, much like a firefight or something like that, where you do what you need to do, and then in very British typical fashion, it's kind of dust yourself off, have a laugh, and crack on.
Yeah, and I love the modesty that comes with you, and you also you and I were talking about a couple of your people you had on your book who I'd love to have on the podcast. Another person famous for his climbing of mountains, Nims Perger, and also Aldo Kane. Why do you find those two colleagues of yours inspiring leaders? What are the qualities you admire in Nims and Aldo?
Yeah, I think it's again through action, isn't it? Really, so leaving kind of our world and then almost reinventing yourself and applying the knowledges and the kind of hard fought lessons that you've learned into something different, and and both very different but very alike, and have gone on to do extraordinary things in their own fields. And look, I love Aldo. He's an inspiring person for me as well, and I think it's important that given all the nuances and negativity around social media, it's important that actually social media can be positive. It's up to you to make sure that you are following and listening and being inspired by the right people, and that's on you. And it's ultimately designed as an algorithm, isn't it, to divide and cause wedges between certain groups and people, and that's what the algorithm feeds off. But for me, I just follow people that inspire me, and Aldo is a very good example of that. Again, he's a husband and a father and an accomplished climber, and he's just out there getting on with it and getting stuck in, and but also has remained very, very humble. A fantastic person that will always pick up the phone and speak to you whenever, and somebody that I admire and look up to as well. So it's important to have those types of people are in your circle as well.
Because I loved reading Aldo's book as well, and I saw there was a similarity between you both. Were you not both sniper instructors?
Yeah, so Aldo, we both did the Royal Marine sniper course when we were in the Royal Marines. I did 3 years in the Corps or in the Royal Marines. And for me, I did the sniper course as a bit of a prerequisite for selection. It was what is the hardest sort of course that I can do that will set me up for success, then moving into selection. So, yeah, and Aldo was a sniper as well. I never deployed as a Royal Marine sniper. Aldo did on sort of telic and everything else. But for me personally, it was just setting me up for success and giving me the necessary skills and soldiering skills that I could use to my advantage on selection. And to be honest, it was probably the best course I could have done.
Yeah, well, that ties us nicely into my next thought is you were awarded on the basis of two very special operations you were involved in and the way you showed up at them, the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross. And I think there's only a handful that have two in the SBS, but there's not many of them ever been awarded. It's the next award after the Victoria Cross. And you're very humble about it, but it is a phenomenal achievement. Just tell us the stories behind that award and what you learnt from those occasions, because there were a couple of occasions, weren't there?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I sort of don't feel uncomfortable talking about it, but I'll try and give some context as to why maybe I do. And I think I've been very, very fortunate, and I feel uniquely placed to then talk about the things that we are going to talk about around leadership. I've been surrounded by incredible leaders, and it's almost like a cheat code for me, being within the special forces and being surrounded by these incredible leaders of men. So I've learned, operationally what good leadership looks like. And I've sort of lent into this as much as possible. And from being a new guy in special forces, again, life's like snakes and ladders, isn't it, Jonathan? You finish selection, you're awarded your new badge and the beret and the belt, and you think, God, look at me, I'm Staz, I'm special forces. But you're the new guy, and you're at the bottom of the pile. You sort of finish at the top of selection, right, and then you hit the big snake, and you're thrust into Sabre Squadron. And then for me, I was deployed almost immediately. That time, sort of from 2008 to 18, was arguably, well, it was the busiest operational output the unit had ever seen. And I was just surrounded by great people, great leaders, guys that had done all of the doing, from, again, Iraq and then into Afghanistan. And yeah, I think for me personally, the sort of couple of jobs that I was wrote up for. So for people that don't know, for context, when you deploy on an operational tour, if you do something that your commanders or people, your peers, think is above and beyond what I would sort of say is my duty, my job, my normal role, then they sort of write you up at the end of the operational tour, and it's a citation that it goes into sort of the higher echelons, and they sit around a table, and there's multiple citations coming through, and they read out the action on target, what you've done. And then they determine where that ranks in terms of medals and everything else. And mine was for a couple of jobs. I was actually in Kabul at the time, around 2013. I had a semi sort of autonomous role, but I was the ground commander for the National Directorate of Security, the NDS. And I was sort of responsible for training the forces, but also leading them onto the sort of execution or the strike element of the job. And there's actually some good leadership sort of things that came out the back of this. But what I'm trying to say, or probably poorly articulate, is all of the kind of experiences that I gained up until that point. I was sort of now an acting sergeant within the SBS. Was an accumulation, of all of the jobs and experiences and things that I'd learned from great people. And I was applying it now, as the ground, strike commander for the NDS. And I won't go into the details of the job, but on one particular occasion, the other commander for the NDS, a really big job. It went right up to the top. I briefed President Karzai, and it was my job. I was responsible for the execution on the target, but with the partner force. And we get to the breach. I laid the breach on, blow the doors off, and then this had all been rehearsed. Multiple orders, processes that we'd gone through. This is a lead into a sort of 2 to 3 month job. It was huge. It was the biggest improvised explosive device attack, multi-stage attack that would have ever happened in Kabul. So it had, for obvious reasons, a lot of the kind of other Five Eyes nations looking at this. And for whatever reason, the leader of the NDS, right at the breach point, sort of, I still remember his face now looking at it, and he sort of gave me the not interested look, shook his head, and turned around and walked off. Now, left us in a very precarious position and situation. We've gone noisy at this point. We have to now sort of continue with the job, and that was my decision. Do I now pause, stop? I've lost 40 assaulters.
What?
And I'm left with a handful of SBS guys that I pulled into the job, a shield man, a dog guy, and a couple of wall snipers. And at that point, sort of had to make the decision, do we now retreat and move back and then re-attack? But ultimately now we've lifted up the skirt. They know we're there. But obviously I decided to push on through with the small sort of team, and then we sort of cleared the compound and secured, 13 tons of HM&E, and it was the biggest haul. They had multiple weapon systems, RPGs, etc., etc. So that was sort of one job. So, and we can talk about that in a bit in terms of the leadership there and what happened to him in that moment. And then another job was something.
Just stay with that. Stay with that one, actually. Yeah. So he was a local Iraqi national, was he?
Afghan.
Afghan. Yeah, of course, Kabul. And he and 40 guys just legged it and left you with it.
Yeah. So, look, they're looking into their leader, and I've done multiple jobs with these guys. We were out every night, sometimes twice a day, twice a night, and never had this happened before. I had confidence in them, and they'd never given me reason to not have the confidence in them, if that makes sense, given the prior jobs and operations that we'd done. But because of maybe the scale of this job and the pressure that was involved, for whatever reason, the commander just shook his head and turned on his heels and walked away. Now that put his team in a precarious position, because they're sort of saying, well, we know what we need to do, but our commander, our boss, our leader is not interested and turned around, and where do our loyalties lie to Staz, to the job, or to our commander? So there was a very sort of strange, what felt like an eternity was probably 10 seconds, right, in terms of the very quick processing of information, and then the decision that then came after. And I spoke to him after, once the sort of literally the dust had settled, and I sort of went for lunch with him the next day, and I was understandably annoyed and frustrated, but happy that the job was a success, and we took on no casualties, etc., and it was a roaring success from the outside looking in. But I needed to unpick that for myself. Was it something I internalized that and thought, was that something that I hadn't done? Had I not briefed him correctly? Was he not sure of everything that was on the target and all the kind of ands attached to that? And for me, I was happy that I'd briefed them meticulously. I'd mind taped the whole area out. We'd done dry runs, rehearsals. They'd been involved with all of the orders process, the weeks and days, and then on the day leading up to that. And he never really gave me a straight answer, and I sort of said, look, what happened? Because I now need to know where you are at in terms of a commander, but also an assaulting force moving forward for future jobs. And he never really gave me a straight answer. He just sort of shrugged it off and sort of enchilared me. And still to this day, I'm sort of left sort of scratching my head as to why on that particular night, in that particular moment, he decided to not want to get involved.
Did you ever work with him again in that kind of role?
We did, but obviously it changed my my dynamic. Not personally with him, and I was always obviously a consummate professional and communicated in the same manner with him. I had to, but it did sort of leave me with question marks around future jobs. And ironically, the second job that I got wrote up for the citation for the CGC, it was another huge job with a high value target. I then took that job, didn't involve the NDS. I handed it over to a partner force within the Norwegian Special Forces, and we executed that job with those guys, but me as the ground commander on the ground, because it was kind of our target pack. And then, without going into too much of the detail, it was a spicy night with lots of things happening, and I sort of again was let down by their local team, their special quote unquote special forces, and sort of follow me guys up the hill, and they didn't. And I was sort of found then in a precarious position on a forward facing slope, sort of fighting two or three through three high value targets, and sort of had to call a £500 in and et cetera, et cetera. But
wow.
And then had to assault a position on my own. So but that wasn't through choice, it was more circumstance and being thrust in the position with which I had to act.
Bloody hell, what a story. I mean, man. And so many questions really. I mean, like, I suppose for you, as you say, inspiring leaders that you've worked with in special forces and people you can trust, it's really important. And when trust is gone, they should be gone. So you couldn't ever trust that guy again. And indeed, if you'd had the people who let you down on the second operation, you couldn't fully trust them, could you? And trust is so important. I mean, just like not just in the military, but now here you are in ThruDark with your buddy. Lewis Tinsley, isn't it?
Louis Tinsley, and that's correct. Just to sort of hopefully close off that point there. Typically, all the operational deployments that I've been involved with previously with the SPS, I was with the guys. I was with the squadron, and selection and everything else aside, which forms part of the person. That's what it is. It's probably the longest, most arduous, hardest job interview in the world, isn't it? Because they know they're looking for a particular individual. And what selection does in effect is just remove those masks. It strips you bare to your core person, and then you really understand who a person is. The military are quite good at that, and selection is very, very good at that. It's sort of all of the things that we hate, sleep deprived, less food, less water. It makes people, it really does kind of shine a light on you and who you are, less the kind of bravado and everything else. And that's what you get. You get a person that passes through that process, and then you earn the trust then by doing the doing through sort of earning your spurs on operational tours, and all of my tours have been done with the squadron, and that trust was implicit, and I would trust any one of those guys, to the left and to the right of me with my life.
Yeah, and you've touched on a really important thing, which I think in your top tip later on we'll cover. This idea of vulnerability without being weak, that only the strong can be vulnerable. And I found, it's taken me till about the age of 62, and I'm 63 now, to strip away the masks that I've learned to wear because of, growing up with my dad being killed when I was young. And we'll talk in a moment perhaps about your mum dying at 33. You put on a mask to cope, and then you go into the military and you put on another mask of this is how to behave and all sorts of things. And then as you get older, you strip them away, or you go and do special forces selection and they're stripped away for you without you actually wanting them. And either they like what they see with the mask, without the masks, or they don't like what they see and you don't even like what you see. And then you're really dealing with that for a long time. What's your thoughts about this idea of vulnerability and ripping away the masks?
Yeah, I think it was an old Japanese proverb actually, where I sort of first heard about this masks, and we all wear three masks. The top mask is the mask that you are happy to show everybody and anybody, and with that comes a sense of almost the mask, and it is kind of how you want to be perceived by your peers, your loved ones, and the outward world, right? A kind of nice cute segue is social media, right? It's you only show the best things on there, right? That's your mask. That's look how good I am at this in life, and I'm killing it, and look at me, look how good I am. And that's kind of social media. That's the mask, the first mask. But actually, once that's removed, the second mask is actually probably more aligned to who you are and who you're happy to be, and that mask's around people that you deeply trust. Your loved ones, when you're at home, when nobody's watching. And that's the kind of real you. But actually, the deeper sort of understanding and reality of who you are is when you remove that mask, and then you're left with actually who you are. When you look in the mirror, and I love that poem from, is it
Wilbro or someone.
When you get what you
the
want,
man in the glass.
I'll say it as well. When you get what you want in your struggle for self, and the world makes you king for the day, to take yourself to the mirror and look at yourself and see what that man has to say. For it isn't your mother or father or brother whose judgment upon you must pass. For the fellow whose judgment matters most in your life is the one staring back at the glass. And that resonates with me, and it's so deep because it's true. We all can put on these false masks and bravado and want to appear to be something that we're actually not. Whereas selection and hardship and adversity really introduces a man to himself and who you actually are. And that's the real you. That's who you are.
Yeah, well, and that's what I like about the Inspiring Leadership podcast. We probably get to the second masks, and occasionally some of them who are happy in themselves even give the third mask. And I certainly have often shared my third mask, particularly with your mate Foxy, when we were both talking about depression, and we were both at different stages thought about taking our lives some years ago. Talking about maybe the second mask, you had a tough upbringing. You wrote about it in your book, the bullies who'd lie in wait for you, and you got off the school bus and you'd have to fight them. And also that sudden shock. My father was the same age as your mother when my father was killed, and your mother died of a brain hemorrhage. And how did you cope with all that? And how does that still influence you today?
Yeah, I mean, good question. The truth is, I guess I've probably not really dealt with it or coped with it, or really given it the attention that it probably deserves. I was 11. Look, rewinding from that, I had what I thought was a good upbringing. It was sort of blue collar, it was working class. I just remember being outdoors loads, just loving running around the streets on a bike or a skateboard, or running around chasing a football, just getting up to mischief as young boys should and do. And everything seemed okay at a young age, but clearly things weren't okay in the marriage. So my parents separated. I was then relocated from Wigan to Mansfield, or Rainworth, a sort of small pit village in Nottinghamshire. And that was the sort of the first real change for me. It was what's happening. I thought everything was great, and they weren't. I don't remember arguing or it being a sort of an insidious or difficult place to live as a kid and growing up. I didn't sort of feel that. But obviously, their marriage broke down. I was relocated with my older brother, and now I have a stepfather who's not particularly nice, and it's a new place, it's a new school. I've got a stupid accent because I'm from Wigan, which I've thankfully lost now, and I'm the new kid. And then you then go through that process of the pecking order and finding yourself, lots of scraps and everything else in between, and very quickly turned my sort of hand to sport and football, and was then accepted within that group. And just as I was about to leave sort of primary school and head to secondary school, I remember at the time I was up in Wigan visiting family, and sort of being sat down and sort of told that, Mum, we left on the Friday, kisses, bye, hugs, see you on Sunday night. And having being sat down on the Sunday morning and saying, look, we've got to go back now. Your mum's not well. She's in hospital. But I'm 11, and I'm sort of thinking, what do you mean she's not well? She's what does that mean? So we raced back to the hospital in Mansfield. And I sort of still, again, it's one of those things you don't really forget once you see it. Walking into the hospital, and my mum's in an induced coma. There's tubes, there's everything else. And as a kid, it's shocking. But also everybody else around at the time, and you don't really, you're sort of self-centered and selfish as a kid, aren't you? And you don't, and rightly so, the prefrontal cortex isn't formed. You don't really think too deeply about other people or relationships or the effect then that has on the people that are around us. And I sort of went into my sort of own shell and thought, well, it'll be all right. I sort of was I'm sure she'll be fine. She'll pull out, and doctors, fix her. What's going on? Why are you taking so long? Just pull the tubes out and let's get on. But actually, over the process then of about a week or two, things weren't getting better. She'd had a brain hemorrhage, a catastrophic brain hemorrhage, and even if she managed to sort of regain any form of consciousness or come off the ventilation machine, then her quality of life would be severely impacted. And so the decision was made to turn the ventilator off and ultimately end her life. And it was just a surreal feeling, to be honest. It's a sort of an out of body experience. You get to say your goodbyes, but it's not really a goodbye because it's all one way. Never got to say the things that you probably wouldn't say as an 11-year-old anyway, but romantically now you'd like to think you'd say and say the things that you would want to say, and at least have that sort of form of love back. But that was kind of taken away from us. And then subsequently, I'm now left in a house with a stepfather who's, I can look back now and with hindsight, and give him some benefit of the doubt here and say, he'd lost his wife. He's now got 2 kids that aren't his kids, and has the responsibility and the pressure of raising us. But he wasn't a nice guy, lots of arguing and everything else, which then actually my grandparents, my mother's parents, then moved down. They sold up everything that they owned and everybody that they knew, a very, very selfless act to then come down. We moved into a 3-bed small bungalow in the same pit village, and we're being raised by my grandparents. And life just then very quickly moves on. And I remember being at school and then moving into secondary school, and I was then the kid that people are sort of pointing at and whispering, "Oh, Staz, his mum's just died," and I hated that. I just hated that not attention, because it wasn't. It was almost a secondary attention of sort of pointing and not sniggering, but kids sort of almost feeling sorry for you. But I didn't know how to deal with it. And back in the day, I mean, I'm only 41, but there was no real structure in place. There was no support network. There was no mental health nurses. There was no form of counselling offered to me or my brother. You just had to sort of get on with it. And I remember going on holiday with my grandparents, and we're all in the same room but on separate beds, to wherever we were, Benidorm. And I can still remember my nan crying herself to sleep, and I'm awake, I'm thinking about it, and just it's very, very difficult, raw emotion. But to be honest, Jonathan, I just felt angry. I felt like the world had just let me down, and why me? I felt quite victimised, and internalised that and didn't speak about it, and just was very, very angry. And thankfully for me, bar the few sort of outbursts and everything else, and understandable anger, I managed to channel that into sport and into football. Because who knows what would have happened if I didn't have that as an outlet, given my situation and access to the kind of area that I was in, and the deprived area, and lack of opportunity, it would have been easy for me to sort of slip off the edge and go the other way.
And wow, what a story. And I really relate to that. I remember my mother had a second stroke, but I was not 11 like you. I was probably 48. And she never really recovered from that. And I remember, like you, being at a hospital bed and talking to her, but I wasn't getting any responses, and just telling her how much I loved her, and getting nothing back. But you just had to
Yeah,
transmit it one way.
yeah,
I
yeah.
once did, just relating to what you went through. I went on a course, and it was an incredible course, the Mankind Project, and they arranged it so that I had my father's blessing. In other words, they arranged a conversation between me and my father, someone role playing my father. They pulled back the shroud, and I had a magic wand, or I just touched on it, and I got 5 minutes to talk to him, and he would talk back. Now, they did it so well, and it's broken that. It's called the Mankind Project. You might want to think about doing it. I'd really recommend it, because it was something that was a block for me, and it's completely liberated it. It's like I've had that conversation, and you could have that conversation with your mother, your mother's blessing.
Yeah, it's difficult. It was a and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. It's a difficult situation, but it's certainly. I try and look at the positives. It gave me a harder exterior, and I straight away I thought, okay, well, this is life, and it's not all roses, and we have to deal with that and get on with it. But not to sort of labour the point too much, but it's like we had like an open casket, and I remember almost being forced through my grandparents to say, come down, to the funeral directors and say goodbye to your mum. And I'm 11, and I just thought, I don't want to do that. I
No,
don't want to. I want to remember my mum how I remembered her. And oddly, I don't have much memory of her. Whether or not that's something that's my brain has done to protect me, I don't know.
yeah,
But I don't have many core memories. I have a few vague memories of her, but not many.
no,
But the main memory I have now is being sort of frog marched into, and they thought they were doing the right thing, and just sort of like it's the last chance to say goodbye, and it's sort of. But it's your mum. She's in a casket, and it's all cold, and everything's kind of. It's a weird environment, and just sort of being forced in to say goodbye and give her a kiss, and it's just like I'm 11. I'm fucking freaking out here. This isn't cool. So that's sort of not a good thing. So yeah, there's probably some other stuff that's sort of attached and things that need unpicking and unpacking there, which probably I haven't, but I've just tried to bury that, and then move on and use that as fuel to my fire, which looking back has actually probably helped me.
oh, no doubt about it. And I would say huge admiration for all you've achieved, and with the benefit of 22 more years on top of you of fuck ups and blunders and mistakes that I've made. I wish I'd addressed some of these issues earlier rather than waiting until I was about 62.
Yeah,
So we can chat separately, but I
yeah,
think there's some really good programs that really help you, because if you don't deal with it, suddenly, woof, it comes in years later, a bit like PTSD. Years later, it comes in, and it surprises you, and you do some stupid things, and you make some bad
I've I've
decisions.
I've got a very weird-ish story about this, and I'm a non-believer. I believe in reality and science and everything else, and I'm not a massively sort of religious person, although I believe in something a higher power and everything else. But we went to see, my wife booked it, a local, is it a clairvoyant?
Oh
Is it?
God, right? Okay,
Oh
yeah.
my God, Jonathan, I was so anti, no, no, load of rubbish. They just pry on people that are vulnerable and everything. But we sat around this table very bizarrely in somebody's kitchen, and it was one of those boards, Ouija board things moving around. And honestly, I went to this, and I had something of my mum's that I've had. It's an encyclopedia. And she scribbled all in it, all in the inside and everything else. And I took it with me, left it in the car. Now, on the inside of it, there's a little poem. And she must have been, I don't know, maybe 16 to 18 when she owned this encyclopedia. And it's down by the river, carved in a rock, three little words, forget me not. Now, this encyclopedia's in the car. We sit around this squeegee board, and I'm sat there all, oh God, what a load of rubbish. Can't believe it. And then they're like, okay, someone's come through, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I'll try and make this quick. they said, look, ask us a question, something that will validate you knowing that this is your mum here. And we went through all the name stuff, and I was like, okay, I've got something with me today. It's in the car. What is it? And the thing moved around, and it spelt out encyclopedia. Now the people doing it, moving it, went, we don't even. What does that mean? I went, it's encyclopedia, and they went, oh wow, we never had that before. And then I said, so the hairs start coming up a bit on the back of the neck. My wife looks at me, and I said, look, inside of that encyclopedia there is a poem. What is that poem? And they said it out, down by the river, carved on a rock, and I just thought, no way, that how on earth would? And I've never communicated this openly on a podcast. It's the first time I'm telling this story on a podcast. I've never told anybody about that before. The only other person that knew was my wife. She's now in floods of tears. And I had this weird moment of, oh, are you happy that that's valid? I'm like, well, yes, kind of. But, and it was, oh, well, over to you, kind of, what do you want to say? And I was sort of then left all a bit shocked and didn't quite know what to say. But it was just the classic usual stuff. And, and then there's some nice things that were said. But although we were, quote unquote, communicating, I still felt like I wasn't communicating, if that makes sense. But I just wanted to sort of share that.
No, very special, actually. Very special story. And I think we try and make sense of life, and everything is logical and you can explain everything. But you know what? There's a lot of things you can't explain. We have 89 billion neurons in our brain. We have 40,000 around our heart. We have 100 million in our gastrointestinal tract, which is linked by the vagal nerve. Yeah. They're like mini brains. And so how does that come? That these are mini brains that are communicating to the brain more than the brain communicates to them. What is it picking up? And I don't know, energy fields between people, stuff there's just a whole area of things we do not yet understand. Yeah. And so I wouldn't poo-poo that. I just go, that was what it was. Yeah. Amazing. Hey, look, we have had an amazing time. I would love, there's so much more we could talk about. I would love to, maybe in a year's time, get you back. Then you could talk more about ThruDark and what you've done and the next challenge. But let's end nicely with what I call the top tips. So, Staz, would you say who you are, what you're doing now, what you've done in the past, and give us those, I think you got about 4 points that you wanted to make about top practical tips to people. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm going to be slightly greedy and apologies for that. But I think...
Tell us who you are first. Let's begin with tell us who.
Okay, so I'm Anthony Staziker, 41 years old. I'm a husband. I'm a father to 3 boys. Former UK Special Forces operator, served 13 years in the British military. I was awarded the Conspicuous Gallantry Cross for combat actions in Afghanistan. I've subsequently left and set up ThruDark. We're a high-performance outdoor clothing brand, and I'm a co-founder of the business and the brand.
Fantastic. And what is the tips that your top tips?
Okay, so I think focus mainly around leadership and the things that I've learned and how I apply that. I think number 1, authenticity. Be your authentic self. Don't try and be anybody else, because people will see straight through that, and that will serve you well. Inspiration. Inspire through action and not words. And then communication. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Make sure that you communicate clearly and effectively to everybody around you and with the same respect. And then empathy, number 1. So understand the people that you work with on a personal level, and then you will get the most out of them professionally.
Fantastic. Staz, I knew this was going to be a good podcast. And it was, I think, one of the best, because of this combination of your Special Forces military background, things like Everest that you've climbed, plus that you're a business owner and you've had to be an entrepreneur and start from scratch, learn it all. And yet the humility, the humanity, and the humor. So thank you very much. It's been fabulous having you on the podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Cheers.